Okay. Good evening, everybody. Hi, it's Bob Weathers here at your Vitality Project with my dear friend, Angela McLeod.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Bob.
Hi. Nice to see you this evening. And I was just sharing with Angela that this topic tonight is near and dear to my heart because I experienced so much of what we're talking about tonight in our relationship, Angela. So I'm really delighted to be meeting with you to talk about this. Let me introduce it just briefly, Angela, and then I'd love to invite your reflections on this whole topic. There's a significant Jewish theologian and philosopher from the 20th century. I'm writing his name in right now, Martin Buber. In fact, Martin Buber was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for his work in Israel, and was just one of these very, very impactful thinkers in the 20th century. And he was the one that, in fact, he wrote a book called I and Thou, and he was the one in that book that talked about two different kinds of relationships. He said there's what he called an I-Thou relationship. I'm posting right now. And he contrasted that with an I-It relationship. And that's really our topic tonight. An I-Thou relationship is where we deal with people in our lives as if they're sacred. That's really the sense of thou, that we honor people's subjective preferences and priorities and needs, and that we value them for who they are as a thou. And Buber contrasted that with an I-It relationship, where we see people not as thou, we see them as literally as an it. And by that he meant where we utilize people more as utilities rather than really openly relate to them with our hearts. People become objects to us. Oftentimes, people are just there in terms of whether they can meet our needs or frustrate our needs, and they're really kept at arm's length. And so the one is a heart relationship, the I-Thou, and an I-It relationship would be much more a utilitarian, almost like a using of a person. And he contrasts these two, and he talks about them in terms of the impact it is to be on the receiving end. And Angela, you and I have used different language over the years together, but we certainly have talked about how it is that what it feels like to be treated as an it, to use his language, versus to be treated as a thou. And in fact, there are trauma theorists in psychology that would say the essence of psychological trauma is being objectified, whether it's a parent with a child or partners with one another, is that the human psyche wants to be experienced as a thou, as well as to give that experience to others. And when we reduce human relationship down to a transaction, and only a transaction, it's wounding, if not traumatizing. So our topic tonight is how to successfully build I-Thou relationships. And it's wide open for you, my dear, just wherever you want to go. Yeah.
Okay. I thought about this quite a bit today, and
thank you.
Yeah, there's a couple different strands for me around this. And first, as you know, I've been steeped and immersed lately in studying the nervous system, and it's very parallel to what you talk about, the red alert brain and the resting brain. And so what strikes me is that when I'm in red alert brain or fight, flight, or freeze mode, then I am more likely to relate to other people as its, as you were just describing, because when I'm in that mode, a lot of my energy in my brain, in my body, in my psyche is based on seeing the world as threatening, or seeing that I need to get something in order to feel safe.
Yes.
And in some ways, it's just sort of a natural thing in our biology and in our neurobiology. But if I'm stuck in that mode, then it's harder for me to be in my heart and to have a sense of safety, and to be able to look at other people that I'm with as somebody as a thou, as somebody that I want to empathize with, connect with, because I'm sort of wired to be needing something from them. So it's hard for me to put it into words very well, but I have experienced that feeling of the way that I recently experienced it is when I'm feeling really scared and I'm wanting approval, or I'm wanting somebody to affirm me and validate me, and it's coming from a place of I'm in that fight or flight mode, I'm in a freeze mode, I'm needing them to validate me. And so it's not so much about wanting to connect with them and their heart. It's that I don't feel good enough, or I don't feel okay, so make me feel okay. You know, tell me that I'm good enough, or like me, or lavish me with praise. And so that's just one example. But one of the parts that's puzzled me, and I'd love to hear you talk about this a little bit, is that we're wired to connect. Like, we're social beings. So in a sense, we need connection. And so I've been kind of vacillating with, how is it different to be in resting brain and acknowledge that I need connection, I want connection? And how is it different than being in red alert brain, where I'm needing connection, but it's more to be validated and not so much about getting connection? So can you hear my distinction there, or the question?
Yeah, I do. It's a great question. I love it. I'll respond to you briefly out of some thoughts that come from Carl Jung, and then continue the dialogue. Carl Jung talked about addiction, and we talk about addiction here at your Vitality Project in its original sense. The etymology of the word addiction, as you know, I know, comes from the Latin term for enslavement. And so when Carl Jung corresponded in the early days as Alcoholics Anonymous was developing, he was in correspondence with Bill W. They wrote back and forth about addiction, and Carl Jung said that he felt like that addiction is a thirst for wholeness. And if I use that as a bridge to your question, it's like, I think what we thirst for is the real deal. And this is really Jung's point. His formula is, he uses a Latin phrase, spiritus contra spiritum, which would be true spirituality as opposed to spirits, as in alcohol spirits. He was writing to Bill W. around alcohol. But he was saying that spiritum, which would be spirits in the sense of alcoholic spirits, they're kind of like a facsimile of the real deal. And what we really want is the real deal. Well, analogously, it feels like to me, though we're wired for relationship, and if we're in I'll just use the terms that we've been using here tonight. If I'm in red alert brain, that desire for relationship it is a desire for relationship, but it's not nearly what's possible in authentic, mutual, reciprocal, deep, heartfelt, loving relationship. And that would be the thirst for the real thing. That would be the thirst for wholeness. And so both would be thirsty, but one is, it depends on where are they directed. To use Martin Buber's language, is my thirst to have you as an it. I liked very much that list of things you went down, Angela. Is it for you to mirror me? Are you merely in my life as an antidote to low self-esteem? Just as one example. That's a certain kind of relationship, but not nearly an I-thou relationship. And I think what Buber and Jung, and it's implied in your question, what they're pointing to is that the human heart wants authentic connection, and that thirst for wholeness can only be met in an I-thou relationship. And so I guess we'd say thirst A and thirst B, and they're not the same.
Yeah, some of the work that I've been doing in the last few years has been going deep within myself to find those core beliefs. You know, I'm not good enough, that hole that's wanting to be filled, and that looks to be filled from an it relationship, from somebody else, that could never be really filled. And I've been learning more and more to value myself, and then to bring myself to relationships with people and relate from the heart to heart, which I agree it's much more satisfying. It feels like you said, the real deal. It's what I was really thirsting for.
You make me think of a kind of postscript to what I just shared as I listen to you right now, Angela, too. And you and I have spoken of this before. And actually, I feel tears rise up around this. It runs so deep for me. The personal awareness of this is that there's a bit of a paradox built in here, is that it is in the context of authentic love that we develop a hunger for authentic love, and that hunger leads us to more authentic love. And so I guess it would be ideal if I could go to a desert island and work through my self-esteem issues and come back to the rest of the world and seek authentic love. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But I think that rarely, if ever happens. It's in the context of truly healing relationships. You and I have shared various disappointments, even trauma from our past development, and whatever has led to my being able to experience both receiving and hopefully transmitting I-thou relationships feels like it's part and parcel of I-thou relationships that have helped me to develop that capacity. So there's very much this kind of circular sense of it. You know, the phrase that people say, you know, you need to first love yourself before you go out in a relationship. There's a truth in that. It's not that there's not a truth in that. And I think you and I both have done a lot of work interiorly to make sure that I'm not just coming to other people and itting them, you know, objectifying them. And I've done that in my life out of abject need or out of a constriction. I own that. So there's a lot of interior work that you and I have done that might be seen as desert island work. And yet I don't, as necessary as that is, I don't feel like that's sufficient. I feel like I need authentically loving connections like I have with you that nourish that capacity to really thirst for wholeness in a big way. And so I think both are necessary. I'm going to quote my dear friend Angela McLeod, who says, it's both and. It's both and.
Yeah. I love what you're saying. And I've often, I came from a place a few years ago of a recognition that I believed that I needed to fix myself first or get healed enough to be worthy of having a really satisfying friendship or love relationship or whatever. And that is still in me. There is still that, it's like an imprint, you know, that I may never get rid of. But what I've noticed is that I bring both now to relationships. I slip in and out of itting people. I slip in and out of just needy, you know, help me, fix me. And then I shift back into, oh, I'm okay. You know, I'm here. I have so much to give. Let's share. And so for me right now, I may always have both, and they sort of dance and they go back and forth. And I forget, and I get into that habit, you know, I don't know if it's a habit or if it's a conditioning of not being good enough, and, you know, trying to get somebody to affirm me, and then I recognize it. And it's in the relationship, the same relationship where I experience I-thou, I also experience the I-itting, I-it. And so as I listen to you, I realize that I guess I'm seeing it in sort of a new way now, that it's okay to have both of them. It's just that with some of the people that I feel closest with, I may it them, I may forget, and that may be painful, or they may not enjoy it. But if the bigger context of our relationship is more I-thou, then that's part of that healing, I think.
Yeah. There's so much that's evoked for me as I listen to you. I love you reflecting back and then extending what we're talking about. It's beautiful to me. There's one author, I have several of his books over here on my bookshelf, who's a psychoanalyst who writes about this in terms of it's the repair of the itting. He doesn't use this language. You and I are inventing it as we talk. It's the repair of the itting that paves the way for thouing. And so you'll not get it any other way. It's not like you can just, you know, I'm going to go work on thouing and then I'll just master it. And then I'll go be with people. We learn how to thou others, to respect, to value, to exercise mutuality and reciprocity. We learn to do that in the smithy of itting. And as we repair the objectification and the misdirection, the missing the mark, as we repair that, what builds in time in its place are the muscles of the heart to be able to sustain authentic intimacy. And so I don't know how else we get there than what you're describing.
Yeah. Yeah, I do like seeing it as a dance that they work together. And it's also humbling, because when I notice that I'm doing that, you know, and I can acknowledge it and then go to the person that I may have id.
Yes.
And I can acknowledge it and apologize or whatever I need to do, that repair, that actually deepens the connection between us.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's
It's
a
ironic,
trust that's
isn't it?
built, because they then see, you know, that I'm willing to say, oh, I can, you know, I can sort of clean my side of the street, that languaging, or I can notice, you know, what it is that I just did. And vice versa. When somebody comes to me and says, look, I did this thing and I'm sorry, you know, I can see that really didn't feel good. How was that for you? And so then we're developing, it's like there's no need to even say that the idding shouldn't happen. It's almost like that keeps me humble, actually. And it makes it understandable to me when somebody else, when I'm in the position on the receiving end.
Yes. Yes.
You know, so I may not like it. I may not feel like coming back together with that person right away. But if I'm receiving that, I can also feel some compassion. Like they're just caught up in that mode right now, you know, and just give them a little bit of tolerance.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, we were talking earlier today, and it just got evoked for me in the last sentence or two of what you were saying. And it comes to mind. I haven't thought about it. I've only thought about this idea in the last 2 days, and it's not fully developed, that's for sure. But how we've talked, including in recent posts, about how it is that one way to operate in life is to go through life kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, basically. You're just waiting to be done to by somebody. We've talked about it in our posts as a victim identity, where I basically walk around with the identity of just, I'm victimized by life, and if it wasn't for that, I'd be perfectly happy, and everyone seems to keep victimizing me. And so I don't mean to make light of it, because it's really a person develops that in the context of overwhelming trauma and just are never able to shift out of that. So I don't mean to belittle it. So there's that way of operating, and then there's another way of operating, which we've talked about, which is the capacity to grieve and accept. So I grieve the fact, for example, let's say that I say something, and it would only ever be unintentionally, but I do this and I somehow offend you, is that rather than you going into a contraction, is that you would grieve, just as you just said, you would grieve Bob's limitations in that moment, because they're not different than your own. It just happens to be, I'm the one who did the limited thing. And then, God willing, you would accept it, and we would extend an olive branch and we'd repair our relationship. It's the third one that we were talking about today that's new to me. And it really fits with the way that you're talking about idding as not only inevitable, but actually it's almost like it's the fuel for developing authentic intimacy. And so the third perspective that Angela and I were talking about today would be looking at, what if you embraced, in this context, what if you embraced idding as going with the territory? Not that we want to take up permanent residence there, but that it's quite inevitable. And let's embrace this as an opportunity to get closer, to go deeper. Isn't that an incredibly different attitude to have? Rather than looking over my shoulder all the time, afraid that something awful is going to happen. I'm not wanting you to offend me, nor I you. We cannot help but do that if we're close. Two human beings cannot help but do that. I have no friendship that's lasted for any period of time where there hasn't been injury at some point or misunderstanding in the relationship. But what characterizes these relationships, why they've lasted for 20 and 30 and 40 years, is that we've found a way to move through it back to thou. And so what would I take away all of those ruptures? They didn't feel good, but if I took them away, I wouldn't have the depth that I have with the friends in the house.
And then it also, as I've been describing it and listening to you too, that it almost becomes something we do together. If we both accept and we understand that we're each going to have these limitations, and as we experience actually working through them and kind of coming back together in the heart,
Yeah.
then it's something we are doing together. And that's I felt like I was going somewhere with that. That we is bigger than
Yes. Yeah.
than just those
Yeah.
ruptures that happen.
Yeah. It's beautiful. I think where you went was just perfect. You know, psychology talks about the way to resolve interpersonal conflict, whether it's two individuals or two different groups, is to find a superordinate goal. That's the technical term for it. Is to find something beyond that, and to pick our language is to find the we. If I'll give an example that comes up all the time in my work. I work all day, every day, as you know, in and around addiction and recovery. And some significant portion of the work I do is dealing with families, couples that are dealing with the aftermath of addiction as somebody is embarking in early recovery. So there's a lot of hurt feelings, a lot of animosity, a lot of betrayals of trust, a lot of work to be done. And it's not unusual in the work I do for the, let's say, the non-addicted spouse. I'll just pick that example. And by non-addicted, I mean not severely addicted to substance. Typically, one is in recovery from that, and the other one is not. It's not always the case, but I'm just going to pick that as an example. You notice how I qualified that, right? We'll just leave it at that for right now. A little asterisk right there, but we won't go on that particular thing. But when I'm dealing with them, the typical response or reaction, which is understandable, is you mustn't love me. If you loved me, why would you drink? Just to pick that example. And what part of my work, in fact, it's right at the heart of my work, especially early in recovery, is can we find a way to look at addiction as the problem and join together that we are going to fight addiction rather than you're the one I hate because you're the addict. It's so it's a very practical way of moving from it, which is you're an addict, a label, to addiction is the devil and we are thou together. It's a very different move, and it's not playing just word games. There's a different felt sense to being looked at, including in recovery, as a thou, as opposed to a speck of dust, an it.
I love what you're saying, and tying it back into addiction and recovery, and that it's usually not just one person who's getting sober and recovering. It's usually the people also around them. The group process, their family or whoever.
I have a favorite poem about the I-thou relationship, and I hadn't thought about it, but I wonder if you'd be okay if I shared it.
Please do.
It's really up to you, and it's one you're familiar with. It's been a while since I recited it, so I wasn't planning on sharing it. It really captures this, and there's so many beautiful poems that do. This is my favorite. It's A Third Body by Robert Bly, his beautiful poem. I'll recite the poem and give you the last word, and we'll be done for tonight. But if this could be in a send-off as an inspiration to what's possible in a relationship, Robert Bly wrote a volume of poetry, and he wrote it to his wife many years ago. And this poem is my favorite from that volume, and it's put in terms of marital love. I think we might as well expand it to include any I-thou connection. And I know Robert would appreciate that, because that was really his intention with the poem. It's called A Third Body. A man and a woman sit near each other, and they do not long at this moment to live in any other time or place, to be older or younger. They're content to be where they are, talking or not talking. Their breaths together feed someone we do not know. The man sees his fingers move. He sees her hands close around a book that she hands to him. They obey a third body that they share in common. They've made a promise to love that body. may come, parting may come, death will come. A man and a woman sit near each other. As they breathe, they feed someone we do not know. Oh boy, I got right to the end. Hang with me. It's tired brain, and I should have thought of this. As they breathe together, they feed someone we do not know, someone we have never, someone we feed somebody. I'm going to have to leave it at that.
Well, you know,
And
it's so beautiful right there, you know.
Yeah, thank you. There's a middle line there, and it's tired brain. There's red alert brain, like we were talking last night in group, and there's resting brain, and there's tired brain. And the idea is it's somebody that we can't talk about, someone we've never seen, and someone that we know deeper than words. And I'll leave it to Robert Bly's poetry. I recommend to anybody who's watching this to go to online, look up A Third Body by Robert Bly. With apologies, Robert. His last stanza is beautiful, and my brain is too tired to remember it right now. And maybe that's the point about the I, thou, and maybe I just gave witness to it, is that even in my fumbling with the last words of it, it's not contingent on words. It's in the look. It's like in the lines of the poem. It's the way the hand moves. There's this third entity. You know, Martin Buber talks about that in his book, I and Thou. He talks about this third body. He doesn't call it that, but he says God, he describes God as the between. That's exactly what Robert Bly is talking about. It's the between. The third body is between us. And it's not so easily described. And unfortunately, it's not so easily memorized. I apologize for that. I hope the spirit comes through. Is that okay?
It very much came through. I very much loved it. And that, by the way, is my favorite book, poem in that book too. I do. And as I was listening to it, I received it freshly. And how it tied in with what we've talked about, and the posts, and the many times you invite people to take that 5-minute pause and breathe and observe the breath. And it just gave me a new perspective on that. Instead of that just being an exercise to do, I can now look at it as breathing into the in-between space. And so the next time I catch myself and I'm itting somebody, I can pause and breathe into the thou space, even if they're not joining me there.
That's so
I can
beautiful.
breathe into it and
so
move into resting brain and see it as part of that poetry rather than just an exercise.
You've just opened that up. That's so lovely. Thank you. I've spent decades with that poem, and you probably have too, and you've just opened it up into a whole new way. I've never imagined that before. The poem it comes to me clearly now, the last lines, and I'll just say them. They're not necessary because I think you got the spirit, and hopefully anybody who has ears to hear or heart to receive got it. A man and a woman sit near each other. As they breathe, they feed someone we do not know, someone we know of whom we have never seen. That's the last lines. Someone we know of whom we have never seen. And it's really what you just said. There's you, there's the other person. And even if there's a rift, it's like breathing into that space. It's like we both know it. We both know of it. And we've never seen it. You know, it's that.
Yeah.
Lovely
way to weave it together and bring in that poetry. Thank you.
You know, it is an example of what we're talking about. None of us do relationships perfectly. I certainly did not do this poem perfectly. And it does its work nevertheless. It does its work nevertheless. And what we're talking about in this third position is to embrace the imperfections, the so-called mistakes, I even like the fact that in my not being able to remember it, you were able to respond the way that you did by getting it. And also you even took it, you expanded beyond that. And what a grace that is. Yeah.
And who knows, I may not have had that insight if it hadn't have been you fumbling with the end of the.
I'm glad you said that. I was thinking the very same thing, and I think it needed to come from you rather than me. So thank you, thank you. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
So
Why
I
don't we
think
wind down for
we
tonight?
demonstrated from
I
where we
think,
started
yeah,
in the
yeah,
beginning. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
beautiful.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. The medium really is the message, isn't it?
Yeah.
Much love to you, Angela. Thank you
You
for your
too.
presentation tonight, your presence, your thou presence. Really grateful for it. I hope this is of use to anybody who sees this tonight on a Friday night or over the weekend, and would love for you to reach out to me or Angela. You can do that through Vitality Project, and I'll pass along your message to Angela. Have a wonderful weekend, Angela. Okay.
Yeah,
And
you
everyone be
too.
safe and be well. Take care. Good
Bye to
night.
everybody. Bye bye.
Bye-bye. 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 Hmm.